Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to Kung Fulio Part 2. This is the sequel. This is where I'm going to be adding a background to the original video that I did for Kung Fulio Part 1. And so come on along. We're gonna paint in some shadow fish. Yep. So conceptually, Twilight Monk is about a monk who these ancient dark shadows had sort of possessed him, not possessed him, because they don't control him, but they're inside of him, and it's a very mysterious kind of a ancient shadow power, and so I wanted this piece to reflect a little bit of that at different stages. These sort of shadow entities kind of talk to him, and uh, I guess it's unclear as to what exactly they are, and I wanted to add a little bit of that mystery to this piece and sketch in some fish, shadow fish. Now, I guess they're actually, the intention is to kind of make them koi fish slash dragons. They're somewhere between one or the other, and there's like transitions and sort of nebulous cool shapes going on in the background, and it's not really a setting, you know. I think that if I were going to do this piece as a setting, I probably would have drawn out a perspective grid and actually like had a little bit more of like story in mind for the exact setting of where he is. But in this, I'm sort of trying to encapsulate all of what the character is, and kind of create something neat. And this is to go into my process here. If you saw part 1, you may have seen that I kind of followed a similar process. I was getting really chunky with silhouettes and creating the shapes that I wanted. Not really too concerned about composition. Well, I mean, I'm working out composition as I'm doing this, but I'm not really too concerned about the details of anything. I'm just going for vibe and flow in the piece, and I'm trying to find cool shapes that are going to work well together, because that's kind of the whole point of this stage. And yeah, maybe I got a little bit into rendering on that dragon head a little bit right here, but really it wasn't that much time. There's a neat little trick that you could use when you really need to tweak the dynamics of something. You just saw me use it. If you go into filters in Photoshop, there's an effect called Liquify. Now that'll take everything on that layer, and it will allow you to squeeze it, push it, pull it. It's much more robust than the free transform tool or the warp tool. Warp does some interesting things as well. Warp is more used when you're trying to get something a little bit more precise, like when you're working with text or a texture that you want to wrap around an element. But Liquify has this really cool feature. It's essentially something that you can just, it turns everything into smushy paint, or like it, oh, even better, I guess a better way to describe it would be like as if everything was like printed on clay, and you could just smush your thumb into it, and that would like kind of pull the clay. So when you grab something, you can pull it into a direction, and that sort of warps everything to blend into it really well, which can be, you can get really interesting results with that. A good time saver. Anyway, here I'm kind of working out the dragon just a little bit more, and the koi fish. I don't think I was looking at too much reference at this stage for the fish. A lot of that was just sort of from memory, and I wanted to silhouette everything in. It's on its own layer. Normally, ideally, you'd probably want this on the layer behind the character layer. I lightened everything up. I've cut out, see, I just realized while I was painting it, oh hey, maybe I need to have the background on the actual background, and then have the character cut out. So that's what I did. Went back and did that. Turned it into a gray layer. After it's turned gray, I realized I wanted to add a little bit more detail to the foreground there. But after the background is all in gray and it's on the actual background, later what I'm going to do, you'll see, is I will probably I'll colorize that whole layer, and then add some color balance effects, and you'll see what I mean there. I'm adjusting shapes and proportions of the dragon's horns. Basically at this stage, I'm still kind of finding what all of this stuff is going to be and where it's all going to fit. I'm getting really sloppy with it. Don't get too hung up on details too quickly. Technically speaking, I probably should have done this part of the process way earlier on. But because this is a piece that I've spent maybe, I don't know, 15 or 16 hours on in several different sessions, it was sort of okay to come back to it. This is just sort of a hobby piece. I had a lot of fun designing the dragon slash fish. At some point I do actually go into Google, and some people have a problem with that. It is, as Paul Richards would say, it's cheating. It's training wheels, you know. But I don't care. I'm cheap. I'll use it. I'm more concerned about end results. And if I can get a more convincing looking koi fish, no, don't get me wrong. Just last weekend I went out to the zoo with a buddy of mine, John, and we were sketching monkeys, and it was totally rad. I think it's really good to expand your visual vocabulary, and Feng Zhu talks a little bit about that as well. The more you expose yourself to interesting places, interesting animals, and really look for how things are constructed in the world around you, that can really impact and affect your designs. It can really impact and affect how you think about designing an animal, or how you even think about, compositionally, if you were designing an alien or a creature, actually going and looking at real world stuff is extremely beneficial. If you don't have time to stop everything you're doing and go to a zoo or go and find, real life reference, it's fantastic to have something like Google. In this case, I think I looked at a couple of pictures of koi fish, but for the most part, it's just sort of like out of my head. I think that comes from years and years of drawing fish. There you go. Why do I draw fish? I don't know. It's just kind of peaceful, I guess. Fish are very peaceful. I don't know if you guys scuba dive, but it's one of the most relaxing things you could do with your time. It's just breathing and drifting along in the ocean. It's pretty fantastic. I haven't done that in a while, but it's totally fantastic. Anyway, so here what I'm doing is I've lightened up my silhouette layer, and I've started to go in and trace out what I had done. And I find this to be the fastest process for doing this kind of line art type of stuff, because you don't want to jump into designing your stuff with tiny little lines. I did that for many years, and it created, like, you put all this time and investment into something, and then you realize it's all tweaked and it's wrong. You need to like change it. You need to modify it. Whereas by doing this kind of chunky brush style, it may seem like you're wasting time because you're drawing over it again, but in a sense, you're just you're setting up your plan. The more you plan something, the less time you'll waste later. And I think that's key with this type of illustration. If you're doing a painting, maybe it's a little different. I mean, I've seen Wang Wei's process and several other guys, and they kind of work with silhouettes, and they just kind of build on that. They don't like redraw anything. And that's a very good time saver for painterly type of techniques. Not really doing a painterly type of a technique here. I'm just doing almost comic book art, really, is all it is. So that's how you draw a digital comic book art style. If you're working on paper, stop it, man. What are you doing? I guess if you need to sell original art, comic books don't pay like they used to. So like most of the bread and butter for doing comic books is like you go to conventions, you sell some original pages, you make yourself a little extra cheddar on the weekends. I don't know why I keep using that term cheddar for money. It's so, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, so but if you wanted to do digital comics, man, you do a page in like a few hours, especially if you use some of the techniques described in my other videos. There's my shameless plug. Check out some of the Twilight Monk comic book pages and some of the cheap tricks, techniques, professional techniques that I use for time savers in those videos. And dude, Ashley Wood, he does 5 pages a day, man. most people might not realize, I don't think he has a lot of originals. He does acrylic paintings. If you own an Ashley Wood original art, like a page, let me know. I'd be really curious to see one because I looked at his techniques, and to me it looks like he's using a 6D pen or an angled chisel brush, and I think he's jamming out. I know I read somewhere where he was saying he does 5 pages a day, so which is very impressive. You can't do that with on paper necessarily. Maybe it's a combination of both, possibly rough sketch, storyboard style roughs, and then scan that in and then dig into it with a chisel brush. And maybe I should do a video tutorial explaining what I'm talking about, but I think I've got his process figured out if I wanted to do that. Anyway, so this is kind of like the way that most, I think, this is kind of replicating more of a traditional comic book art style in the video that you're watching right now. I want to do a series of YouTube videos, basically like those magicians that expose other magicians and dissect everyone's techniques and show you guys how to draw. Like, actually, what you want to paint like Brahm? Pfft, that's easy, man. I'll show you how to paint like, you want to paint like Todd, you want to draw like Todd McFarlane? I'll teach you how to draw like Todd McFarlane. It's easy stuff. So I'll be that guy, you know, the man you love to hate, the villain of the industry. That'll be me. It's all a bunch of simple tricks and Photoshop filters and tools, Wacom tools and digitizations. It's easy. It's not even real. It's an illusion. It's an illusion. We're not artists. We're illusionists. Photo bashing. Pfft, easy. Getting back to the drawing at hand. As you can see, I'm digging into the details at this point. Like I'm beyond the stage of just roughing stuff out, and I'm adding in some of the really tiny, thin little lines in the details. I don't want the background to compete with the foreground, so there's a reason why the background is mostly monochromatic and kind of grayed out and kind of. I mean, I'm going to add a little bit of color to it, but I'm not going to add color depth to it. I'm not going to add really strong highlights. I'm not going to add any kind of vibrant saturation or intricate details in the color or lighting information. I'm going to keep them very separated so that the background just feels almost flat in contrast to the foreground. I had a lot of fun kind of finding this balance between a sort of a koi fish and what I imagine would be like a cool dragon head. And even kind of playing around with the shapes a little bit of the sides of the fish and how the scales might sort of grow off of them in an interesting fashion if they were not really a fish and not really a dragon, but a little bit of both. I tend to really gravitate towards things that are very unexpected and unpredictable, and maybe it's generic. I don't know. I had never really seen it done in this fashion before. And so I wanted to, I don't know, generally speaking, if something is a little bit too cliche, I just don't want to do it. If it is a really cliche idea, I want to throw something into the mix that just makes it weird. And I wish there was a little bit more just weirdness out there. And, you know, if you're an artist and you're playing it safe, I don't know. In my opinion, you're doing it wrong. And I hate when I hate when people say that. I hate when people say, you're doing it wrong. But, because you should be doing it my way. Well, I'm not saying that. Nah, I don't know. It's just my personal opinion. I try to mix it up. Try to do something unexpected. Try to do something that, I try to do something that is, even to me, kind of like, will that even work, you know? And then I sort of figure it out as I'm drawing the thing. Gosh, this was such a tedious effort right here with the scales. I kind of wish that I had just made a brush that would do that, you know. And I've been meaning to go in and make a tutorial on brushes and probably just do little segments, little couple of minute videos explaining like here's how to make a scale brush, a chain brush, more of a traditional pencil style, paper style brush, things like that. Let me know if you guys would be interested in that sort of a thing. There were a number of questions that I had. Some people were asking me about tools and what kind of tablet I use. I'm using an Intuos 5, although as I understand it, it's switched now. It's the Intuos 5 is now the Intuos Pro. or the Wacom Pro, something like that. Anyway, I'm using a medium size. I'm actually, for this piece, I was working on a MacBook Pro with the Retina display. That's kind of nice, although I don't think Photoshop actually supports, or this version of Photoshop, I don't think it supports the resolution of a Retina display. But I find it's pretty smooth. I'm mostly using a MacBook right now because it's, well, it's very reliable, it's very efficient, although I'm not opposed to using Windows-based stuff. In fact, I just got a Cintiq Companion, so I'd be looking forward to I'm looking forward to actually doing a video for that, probably, hopefully this weekend. You can see where I'm cutting and pasting a lot here. Pretty simple to do if you're familiar with it. You just grab the selection tool, select what you want to copy. Here's a little quick key thing. You can just hold down Control and Command, or in a Windows-based thing, I think it's Alt and Control, and you're able to just duplicate it. And if it's on the same layer, it'll just stay on the same layer. Anyway, it's kind of nice for doing things where there's a lot of pattern work involved and things of that nature. Here I'm going in and just kind of adding a little bit of refining some of the edges and cleaning up some of the line work a little bit. I really wanted to keep a little bit of a paper kind of an effect, so I used a brush that has just a little bit of texture on it. I'm getting pretty small with the details here because I think that this piece is going to be made into a poster. It's going to be a pretty large-sized image for the final. And you'll probably be able to pick one of those up at the Long Beach Comic-Con if you're going to that. 2013. I don't know when you're going to be watching this. If you missed it, check out twilightmonk.com. Probably be available there too. And while you're there, pick up a book. Could really use the support. So, another plug. Yeah, see how many more of those I can fit in here. Next up, adding in a little bit of a highlight edge. It's kind of a thing that I started doing not that long ago, where I'll have my sort of like a rim light or an edge light, and then kind of, I guess I saw it in a Akihiko Yoshida piece, where you just sort of feather that edge so you've got something that actually physically or is drawn in to define that little edge, that little ridge. One thing that I would recommend to most people who are starting out, or I don't know, just people who are looking at this video to pick up a few techniques and things like that, just keep doing that, honestly. I don't know that I ever really took an official lesson anywhere. I don't know how to paint. I don't know how to draw. I learned from just faking it. And most artists are the same way, although some people actually go through the process of training and going and training under a master or somebody who's very experienced. I found that life is the best coach, and I'm not very fond of precise systems. I don't like to do things the exact same way every time. I don't like to, I guess, follow any particular rules. I was never really very good at math because I don't like the idea that there's only one outcome, or that there's only, I mean, yeah, sure, the neat thing about math is there's a number of ways to get to the same outcome, but, and I've grown to appreciate things like that more as I've gotten older, but for the most part, the way that my brain works is that I just like to throw myself into a situation and then figure out how to do it on the way. It's how I learned to snowboard, it's how I learned to draw, it's how I learned to do just about everything that I do. There's, with the exception of a few things that require, for safety, I'll go through whatever training I need to go through for safety, if I'm going to dive or do something dangerous, But for the most part, I just like to learn from experience. I like to put myself in an uncomfortable situation and then rely on my intuition. And I find that that's the best way to sort of build confidence and explore and understand yourself more, and it's not always the most efficient way. God knows that there are a lot of artists out there that are probably faster than me and have a much greater understanding of lighting, and I'm still learning, but the things that I learn, I kind of learn them in a way that I understand and it works for me. It's important to know yourself. I think confidence in your work is more valuable than even technical ability. I love how this little dragonfish turned out down here. This particular one. He almost has a catfish feel too. But adding in those horns just really, with the derpy face, like he's almost happy. I don't know. I hope I get to draw him again so many times. I hope so. This one, I was thinking unicorn fish. Why not, dude? When was the last time you saw a unicorn fish? Not the most common thing in the world. But he's just got like that sweet face, so I was trying something else with that. Digging into some of the smoke down here. Again, I don't want to get too detailed with it because I don't want it to compete with my foreground, you know? This is really just about keeping the flow of the whole piece. And I wanted everything to flow well together and also to have this almost watery shadow feel. I could have, if I was going with a more photorealistic type of an approach, I probably would have done actual like smoke and had like a darker background for that smoke to rise off of. But that's not what this is. That's not what Twilight Monk is. That's not what this piece is. This is me getting fancy with line art. There was a lantern up there, and that lantern just looked awful, so I'm glad I didn't go with that. What is it? I think the contrast of having a physical object in there. Initially, the idea behind the piece was I was going to have just tons of stuff in there, like guitars flying by, lanterns, fish, dragons, and like it was just going to be like little symbols from trinkets from the comic itself, from elements of areas, periods of time in the story. It was going to be sort of like a, you know, everything all in one kind of a piece, and ultimately I decided that that wasn't really, it was just not really working. I think it's still possible, like someday when I'm more skilled or have more patience or something, I don't know, maybe I'll do something like that, you know, similar kind of an idea. And you'll find that, you know, I use some of the same ideas as a starting point many times over with a lot of my pieces. If you look at all the different Creed covers, there really wasn't a lot of, each piece wasn't necessarily like incredibly unique, you know what I mean? But you know, the starting points were similar, and ultimately sometimes that leads to something really unique and original. Sometimes you're on a deadline, and it's like I just don't have time to really think of the most original, unique kind of a piece, because I think a good cover should encapsulate a whole story, or at least an intriguing premise, you know. Something that entices the viewer to want to know more, you know, like what is all this stuff? What are these fish things, you know? And like sometimes simpler is better. Sometimes just a simple statement, a simple idea, rather than you know, trying to tell 5 stories in one. Sometimes I think in our, especially in our high definition era, we get a little bit preoccupied with, you know, what we can do rather than what we should do. You know, just because you can have crazy excessive detail everywhere doesn't mean that you necessarily should. You know, is it necessary for the story? Is it necessary like for communicating the idea? And in most cases, I'm of the school of thought that you shouldn't do more than you have to in order to communicate what's necessary. And that's going to get into a very philosophical kind of a commentary. I don't want to do that. But anyway, I'm digging how those are turning out. As you can see, you know, it's starting to feel pretty good. I'm going in and actually like tightening up some of the foreground elements because I'm feeling pretty good about that background. It's nearly complete, and just tightening up some of the details. I wanted that line art to still feel like it's done with intention. These are not really claws, but they're just sort of like smoky, kind of shadowy kind of claw shapes. Sometimes a shape itself can create an emotion in the viewer on its own. More jagged edges tend to make people feel more like something is more mature or more edgy or more aggressive, possibly. And softer, smoother, flowing edges tend to make people feel a little bit more safe and comfortable. And so there's an interesting combination of those elements in this piece that I think was very successful. And that's it. That's Kung Fulio Part 2, man. And if you want to check out all of the cheats and hacks and action scripts and filters and all the illusions that artists use to make sweet art in the digital industries for comic books and video games, I'm going to be showing you guys all that stuff. So subscribe, homie. Get the edge up on everyone, all those other suckers that don't subscribe to my channel, because cause I'm going to hook you up. And you can help me on my rise to becoming the most despised man in the digital art industry. Okay, thank you, and I'll see you soon. Ciao.